My propensity for risk is great for entrepreneurship. It is terrible for drugs, men, and alcohol. Like that's
Right.
where I really get getting myself in trouble. This is why I don't drink or do drugs anymore.
Welcome back, listeners, to the What Went Wrong podcast, where we tell the untold stories of failure, of bouncing back. And I have my really good friend, Andrea Owen, with me today. And I'm so excited we finally got the interview nailed down because this lady, guys, she's wanted. And so she is like high priority here. So I'm so glad that we finally carved out this time to connect with her and to hear her stories. But before we go into the what went wrong, which I know you're all at the edge of your seats to find out, I just want to share with you, if you don't know who this fabulous lady is, I'm just going to give you a little interlude and then I'm going to let her kind of share where she is with her successes. But Andrea is a 3 times best-selling author, global keynote speaker, certified life coach, host of the popular podcast Make Some Noise, which currently has over 4 million downloads. That is so awesome, something to aspire to. And not only that, but I think this is so cool. You are a retired roller derby player, Veronica Vane. So I love that. But share with us a little bit more, Andrea, about who you are and where you are today.
Yeah, so I'm an author, like you mentioned, and I've been doing that for, I think it's been 11 or 12 years now, and had success beyond my wildest dreams. People ask me, like, what's next for you? And I'm like, honestly, I've done everything, so I'm good. If that's the top, I'm fantastic. But I also coach women in leadership, and also do some keynote speaking, and am a single mom of 2 teenagers. So yeah, it's a great life, I have to say.
That is so, I mean, that is like what we all aspire to, right? At some point to be like, is there more? Yes, there is. There's another ceiling, right? You got to break through that. So we all know where you are today, but we all want to know, before all of the success, there was trials, there was turmoil. I know, I've read your story and you're very open about it, which I thank you for. But our listeners want to know what went wrong.
Yeah. Well, it's sort of funny in how it directly correlates to coaching and how I got in this career. So I had actually heard about life coaching in the early 2000s. This is about 20 years ago, when no one even really knew what it was. It was very new, and if it was known about, it was usually only used in like C-level, executive coaching, that type of thing, or obviously sports coaching. And I had heard about life coaching and thought it was a really neat career, and thought, at the time I was a lot younger. I was in my early or mid 20s, and said to my then husband, I think this would be such a perfect career for me, because I've always been the consummate cheerleader. I'm a natural extrovert and didn't really want to get into sales, which seemed like a natural career to me.
Right.
And with my personality, and also had looked into being a therapist, but I didn't feel like it would be appropriate for me to be, jumping on the couch excited for my clients, like saying, like, let's get you out of this trauma. Let's do it. Let's kick some ass. So I told him in that moment, and I said, I think that to be a really great life coach, you would need to have some more life experience, which I didn't have a whole lot of at that time. So 2 years fast forward, my husband and I were talking about conceiving our first child, and he had an affair with our neighbor who lived across the street. And that went on for 7 months without her knowing either. She thought we were in the middle of a divorce. And then at the end of that 7 months, he got her pregnant, and that's what ended everything for us. And I was devastated. We were about to start a family. We had been together for 13 years, since I was a teenager at that point. And so I was utterly devastated. And I did what I probably should not have done. I started dating right away, and I met someone that I fell in love with. And I thought, oh, this is great. He's so charming and funny and all of these things. And something wasn't really right, but I was ignoring my intuition because I was in such a traumatized and vulnerable state. And about 9 months into that relationship, I found out that he had a pretty severe mental illness, and was also an addict, and had lied about having a terminal illness the whole time we were together to cover up his drug problem that I was funding, because I thought I was taking care of his terminal illness. And I also, at the end of that, found out that I was pregnant. And so he and I had a decision to make. I was still legally legally married to my first husband. Like, I still had all that drama going on in the background, and my life was just a mess, Tabitha. Like, I was just a wreck, emotionally, mentally. I was physically, I was over exercising, just, just like not really taking care of myself in any regard. And when I found out I was pregnant and decided to keep the baby, and then me and the boyfriend ended up splitting up, uh, and I knew I needed to take complete and utter radical responsibility for my life. And that's not to say that I took all the responsibility and blame for what had happened. Like, of course, these men that I'd been with had made some poor choices, but it was really about looking at where I had not trusted myself and my intuition, where I had stayed in relationships for much longer than was good for me, where I had put all of my happiness, my self-worth, and my self-esteem into someone else's hands. And it was like, that's just, like a handful of things that I had to take a really good look at, and dove into therapy, like dove into doing some of the deeper work, which took years. I mean, it didn't happen, it's still going on now that it's been, my son just turned 16. And so, and then it was then really that I signed up for my life coaching certification, and really started to change my life, both personally and professionally. And it hasn't been all perfectly smooth sailing, but that was truly the catalyst that changed me. And I also just want to kind of wrap this up with a bow and say, for the people listening, like, you don't have to wait until you have like a Lifetime movie script handed to you to live out your life. Like, you can change your life when it's like pretty like non-eventful. So yeah, that's kind of how I got here.
So the moment that you found out that you were pregnant, and you were still married to your first husband, and here you have this guy in your life who you obviously loved in some capacity, because like you said, you fell in love with him. And I mean, whether he's an addict or not, that has no bearing. When you fall in love with someone, you fall in love with them.
Right.
And here you're pregnant, and you wanted to conceive with your first husband. So clearly you wanted to be a mom. And so you have this point of, you said you made the decision to go into life coaching. Is there a gap in time there, or was it like instant, like kind of close the gap there for people? Because they might be going through some stuff and think, I can't go ahead with this until I have everything together. That's a lot of an excuse for a woman, is like, when everything is perfect, when the kids go to school or when they go to college, then I get to be me.
Yeah.
And it sounds like for you, you were like, no, like now is the time.
Just balls to the wall. And a couple things, like, please trust me when I tell you that when I told my family and friends that I was signing up for life coaching school, at that moment, they were like, you're going to what? Like, they were like, nobody was like, I definitely think that's a great idea. But also, it wasn't really unlike me. I have like zero impulse control. And I'm not saying this to like, yay, put this in my bio. Like, I am diagnosed with anxiety and ADHD. I don't have a lot of impulse control. I tend to, which is great for entrepreneurship. I always say this, like, my propensity for risk is great for entrepreneurship. It is terrible for drugs, men, and alcohol. Like, that's where I really get getting myself in trouble. This is why I don't drink or do drugs anymore. Men are still, it's a whole nother story for another time. But there was no gap. I went right in when I was pregnant with my son, and it was both a really great idea and a bad idea. It was a great idea because I didn't know this at the time, but it forced me to do my own work. I thought I was just going to learn how to be a life coach. I didn't know the amount of coaching I was also going to get, and how it would really force me to be vulnerable and look at some difficult things that I needed to work on. And so it was a bad idea because I also I made a lot of big changes in my life at the same time, which I don't recommend. When you're going through a really bad breakup or a divorce, like, they don't recommend, moving out of state or changing your career. And I changed my career, but it ended up working out. So I got lucky.
Right. Well, I think you said something so important. You went into it thinking, oh, I'm going to be a life coach. I have to get my stuff together for other people in order, like my profession. And in the midst of it, you had so much growing, like you grew so much. And I think for entrepreneurs, especially women, that is the secret sauce. Like, we always are striving for something or going for something, but in it is the present. It's the, like they said, it's very corny, but it's not about the destination, it's the journey. It's like, it's corny, but it's so true, because whether you're, I mean, and I can imagine with the life coach training that you were
Mhm.
like, it's kind of like when people go to med school and they diagnose themselves with like every disorder that
Exactly.
you're
Yeah.
like, oh, wait, that's me. I need to practice this. I need to do this.
Mhm.
Right. And so you're growing and you're learning and you're doing this. So you become a life coach, you have this baby. Tell us just a little bit, because there is a little gap. Cause like you said, your son 16, right? 16 right now.
Yeah. Uh-huh.
And so in that 16 years, what happened? Because obviously that's the what went wrong. Like that's the pivotal moment that really changed your trajectory, which a lot of the stories of the entrepreneurs that listen or that I interview, they have that. But then tell us a little bit about from then to now, like how you
Mhm.
got where you are, because there's a big gap there and a lot of
Mhm.
other things could go wrong. But how did you stay the course? How did you
Yeah.
pull through? You said you have that impulse, but like, were there other outsourced things that helped you get the success that where you're at today?
Yeah, well, I mean, in terms of career success, I think part of it is, and I don't love to say this because I know that as women we can undermine our talent. But I do think it's worth mentioning, and it's valid that I also got into the industry at a really great time. I was an early adopter, and I
Yeah.
also was, if there's any other life coaches out there listening, or anyone who was, kind of following other life coaches,
Hmm.
I was in the kind of within the first handful, or at least 5 years of creating like a personality brand, which was sort of new at the time.
Okay.
And I launched a business called Your Kick-Ass Life. It was sort of one of the first very few that even had like a curse word, if you want to call it a curse word, in the
Right.
name, which people were like, oh my god, don't do that, that's absolute business suicide. And I'm like, actually it's not. It ended up working out really well. And
Right.
so I think that was super helpful in that the market and the industry wasn't saturated quite yet. That happened like years later. So my timing was perfect. And also I was also in a place where I was sort of dying to tell my story. And these were the early years of blogging. And so I was just kind of putting it all out there, and was vulnerable before vulnerability was kind of like a marketing thing. Like I did it just from a place of genuine, I wanted to tell my story, and I wanted to make sure I wasn't the only one out there. And so other people were,
Right.
I mean, I used to get just emails and emails of people telling me their story, because it was fairly new to do that on the internet, and not anonymously. For years we
Right.
had Tumblr and like Yahoo groups and these like very anonymous places to do that. And I was kind of
Uh-huh.
like, hi, here's like my name and who I am and what I do, and here's like my sad story. So I think that was part of it. And then on a more personal level, that also bled into professional, I got sober in 2011. So when I
Yes.
got pregnant with my son and really dove into my own work, I really listened to my therapist and this other kind of like therapy group that I was in around codependency and love
Hmm.
addiction. And I was like, okay, like maybe I shouldn't just like write the names of my friends in the margins of my self-help books. It's like Tabitha does this and Shelby does this, and maybe it's
Right.
me.
Right. I'm the
Maybe it's
variable.
me. So I started to dive into my own work in that, and then realized around 2000 I had another baby. I got married again. I met someone amazing, and we had a long 15-year marriage, which sadly ended, but we had a baby together. And so we have two children. In 2010ish, when my babies were really really young, I realized like I think I have a drinking problem. And I wasn't going out getting drunk with my girlfriends. It was just at home on weeknights, like drinking a whole bottle of wine all by myself. And my husband
Yeah.
at the time didn't drink, and so it was just me. And my dad got sober when I was 18, so I knew very much what a high functioning alcoholic looked like, and I
Yeah.
was one. And I know now the alcohol free movement, as we're having this conversation in 2024, it's a different conversation than people were having in 2011 when I got sober and came out with my story. And so I do actually identify as an addict and alcoholic. I know a lot of
Hmm.
people don't who are sober, but honestly, that was the thing that catapulted my growth. And once I wasn't drinking anymore, I really didn't have anything to numb myself out. Like work,
Yeah.
yeah, did it a little bit. And so like sometimes the
Mhm.
internet, but in terms of like a substance
Yeah.
to truly help me run away from the feelings that I was avoiding, all the trauma, all the grief, all of that,
Yeah.
I didn't booze wasn't around anymore. And so that was truly when I had to be quiet and still with my feelings, which was one of the most wretchedly painful,
Yes.
terrifying experiences of my life. I was convinced that my feelings were going to kill me. And I think many of us have that fear. Like if I opened up Pandora's
Yes.
box, I'm never going to stop crying. So
Yeah.
that was really the thing I think that, and continues to this day. And I have 12 plus years of sobriety, still continues to be such a source of healing for me in a very, long and painful way. But it's something I'm incredibly grateful for is my sobriety and recovery.
Oh, absolutely. I mean, we heard all your accolades at the beginning, but when I read your story, that to me was like the number one. And I almost led with that, but then I feel like sometimes it takes then that's the only identity that people see, and you're so
Mm-hmm.
many layers of who you are, and that's
All of
how
us
you
are.
yeah, and so it's like but let's just be honest, like people make judgments and they see it and they think that
Oh, yeah.
my sister was an addict and we lost her in 2018. So
Mm.
I so wholeheartedly commend you that you got your shit together and said like
Mm-hmm.
my kids are enough because my sister had kids and she had
Yeah.
nieces and nephews who loved her and she couldn't. And her thing, like you said, I feel like she thought her emotions were going to kill her. She did not
Yeah.
like to cry. She didn't like to feel. She numbed it. She never felt good enough, So all of those attributes. And again, we could be here just an hour long podcast on just that, diving deep into that. Because, like you said, the what went wrong before was bad. I mean, we all go through that. But then when you came to the terms of, was there a moment like when you just said, no, I'm not drinking anymore? Or was it kind of like a little bit over time?
Yeah, that's such a great question. I want to touch on something that you just said though, because I think it's so powerful. And I'm sorry to hear that you lost your sister. That's just excruciating.
Yeah.
Um, and as a mom, I remember there was a moment when I was newly sober
Hmm.
and Alcoholics Anonymous was incredibly helpful for me at the time. And there was a moment where I was really struggling and I wanted to drink. And I was on the phone with somebody from AA. And then I
Uh-huh.
had one hand on my phone and one hand on a bottle of wine. And I don't remember if I was crying or if I was about to cry, but I was upset. And my
Yeah.
kids were in the bathtub, like just maybe 15 feet away from me. The door was open and I could hear them splashing in the bathtub. They were almost 2 and 4 at the time.
Hmm.
And I remember thinking and hearing people talk at meetings about, like I couldn't do it for me, but I did it for my kids and I couldn't do it for me and I did it for my kids. And I remember thinking like, I feel like that's an unfair story to attach to because they tell
Yeah.
us in recovery, they tell us do not listen for the differences of how you feel because then you will make yourself wrong and you are headed for relapse. Only listen for the similarities. So like where you feel similarly to someone's story and their experience, that's what you need to latch onto. And I
Hmm.
remember hearing, like, oh, I did it for my kids and thinking like, is there something wrong with me? Because I love my kids more than anything in this world, but yet still I
Right.
want to drink. And I know that so many people have either lost their life or just stayed in the depths of their addiction and they love their children more than anything.
Yes.
So like what is that? I wanted to understand that very much. And here's my conclusion about it is that uh addiction is so rooted in shame, which
Yeah.
I can, talk about for hours because I work in shame resilience.
Yeah.
And I completely understand and can relate to the fact that shame is such a full contact experience and emotion. And what I mean by that, it can like completely take over both your body, your mind, like your spirit, your soul, like everything that
Yes.
it becomes, when you hear people say it was bigger than me,
Yeah.
that's what I believe that they're talking about. It's the
Yes.
shame that is, and shame, unfortunately, can trump love.
Yep.
It can trump like the devotion and the commitment that we have for our relationships, that we have for our children. And so it breaks my heart when people lose someone in their life. And I've heard it so many times, like, and they say like, I wish that they would have been able to choose me over the drugs. And it's
Right.
not that simple. It gets so nuanced, and and I know it's such a hard conversation to have. And I don't mean to like derail like what we were talking about.
No, no,
I
no,
think
no.
it's
This is good.
important.
Yeah. Well,
Yeah.
I
And it's
think,
just
yeah,
heartbreaking.
when you say that, so many things, even when I'm thinking like of my sister, and I share this in some other podcasts that I've done, is I actually just did a podcast where I share my side of, her story of how it affected me. And I said the one thing I always knew later on, I shouldn't say always, as an adult, was she just felt so much shame, and it was
Yeah.
so powerful. And she actually thought in her mind, if I wasn't here, they would be better off, because
Yeah.
she did not have that self love. So it wasn't like she ever, didn't love her kids. We say that in like the anger moments of like wanting to shake them,
Hmm.
like, don't you love your kid? How great are
Yeah.
they? But like you said, it's so much deeper, because they actually think in their head like they would be better off without me. I'm such a mess. Nobody can fix me. I'm so broken. Like all like the limiting beliefs, and they can numb it. And that's what they've chosen. And she chose
Right.
that for a long time. And
Hmm.
so for me, through the process of forgiving her, but also forgiving myself, because I was so angry and like, why can't we had this great relationship and all of this stuff, and making it about me, because
Yeah.
as we
Like, why am I
normally
not
do.
enough for you to stick around?
Right. But
Hmm.
sitting back and saying, because that was 5 years ago, she was my age that I am now when she died. And when I think about that, and I'm just like, oh my gosh, she had so much life. And, you go into that rabbit trail. But she also had moments where she forgave herself. And, there's a lot, to unpackage there. But I think what you said is so true. It's so much bigger than the person.
Yeah.
And, what I say is like, hate the sin, love the sinner type of thing. It's like
Hmm.
hate the addiction, love the person. Like that's just what it is. And you're not going to always, it's not about you, and you can't do it for
Yeah.
somebody else. Anything.
You
You
can't.
can't chase, even being an entrepreneur. Like, or, people say like, I have a family, and I'm like, I do it for my kids, and I do, but it's for me too. Like you can't
Yeah.
just always have it be for someone else. Like you said, the codependency in that. So I love that you shared that,
Yeah.
um, with that,
It's just
with our audience.
it's that powerlessness that they talk about in the rooms of recovery that is so all consuming, and that ends up keeping people in the dark and in their active addiction. But to answer your question, did I have like a moment? I had several of them, and they were these whispers, which was my intuition saying things like, I don't think a normal drinker drinks like this. I don't think that a healthy person has these kinds of thoughts about alcohol, because one of the telltale signs of addiction is our obsession around whatever process or substance is our poison of choice at the moment. And
Yeah.
it's not even really about the quantity that we're drinking or using. It's the obsession around it, which is a real hell. It's a real mental and emotional hell to be in. And so I found myself getting deeper and deeper into that. And like maybe a year went by, and it just wasn't fun anymore. And I kept trying to get back to it being fun, and just kept failing over and over again, and it just becomes exhausting. And
Yeah.
I did some research, and it was like those were the moments where I was like, okay, I think I have a problem. And so I called a friend who had been in recoveries for several years, and she was
Mhm.
incredibly helpful and compassionate and supportive. And then yeah, and that was in 2011.
Well, that is awesome. I mean, like I said, that in of itself is like the top accolade for sure. Where you are now, like I said, you have 3 best-selling books.
Mhm.
Tell us a little bit of where you are now, and then how can people find you, and what is there something you're working on now that you're passionate about?
Yeah, I mean, I could probably come back on your podcast in maybe 6 or 12 months from now, because I am, I
Yeah.
had a dark night of the soul 2023. Well, the last couple of years have been really rough. Just an autoimmune disease, the pandemic. I went
Oh
through. I'm
yeah.
still like in the middle of my second divorce now, and with 2 kids, and it's been hard personally and professionally, but I do feel like I'm kind of, I'm coming up for air and coming out on the other side. And I'm
Yes,
writing my
yes.
fourth book actually, and revising my very first book, 52 Ways to Live a Kick-Ass Life. So that's exciting that I have that kind of in the pipeline.
Yeah,
And yeah, just kind of like getting my bearings back as
yeah,
I face a brand new life as a single mom of two teenagers now. My babies are teenagers, which is so wild to
yes,
me that, that they grew up. I'm happy to be
yes,
sober and happy to be in an industry that sort of forces me to walk my talk, and stay
yes.
tuned. Yeah. Oh, AndreaOwen.com. And I'm on all the socials at Hey Andrea Owen. And like you mentioned, my podcast is called Make Some Noise.
And we will have all those links for you guys in the show notes, and we'll make sure you get, all that. And my oldest is a teenager, my second oldest is soon to be a teenager, and I have a preteen and two toddlers. So
Oh,
life,
wow.
yes,
You're in it.
it's yeah. So I hear you on the teenage train for that. But no, I'm excited.
Yeah, it's
Yes, and
fun.
come back in a year, let us know. And here's the thing, we all know like entrepreneurship in life, there's never like, I'm up at the top forever.
Mhm.
Like there's always another level. There's always the other, what went wrong. It's about learning and growing from them. And so I just want to thank you so much for your time, Andrea, and your honesty and openness. And guys, if you want to know more about her story, like pick up her books, because she is an open book in her books and her, her Instagrams. I love what you said about like your gray hair. I think that was like in December. That was
Yeah.
awesome. But
Thank
I
you.
just love because you give people hope and permission to be themselves,
Mhm.
whether you're their cup of tea or not. It's like you give them permission. And as women, I just feel like we need that. I don't know why,
Yeah.
society or whatever, it's like we need that permission to be ourselves. So I love that. You guys have to go check her out. And remember, guys, wherever you're at in your life or your business, just ask yourself, to get to what went right, you have to go through what went wrong. So until next time, thanks for joining me. Bye, guys.